Grammar Preview 3, Verbs. This preview of basic grammar covers the following. How to determine which words in a sentence are verbs. At the end of the preview, we'll practice identifying verb forms in English sentences. To understand the grammar we're discussing in this preview, you must be able to identify the adjectives, prepositions, and especially the nouns in a sentence. If you are uncertain about your ability to do this, please watch the 2 grammar preview presentations preceding this one. The basic grammar of verbs. Verbs, I'm going to color verbs a really annoying bright green throughout this presentation so they'll really jump out at you. Verbs are words that show action, like run, jump, sit, play, come, act, go, blow, wait, watch, wiggle, and English has thousands upon thousands more. The main verb in a sentence is the word which represents the sentence's central action, but sentences can, and often do, contain more than one verb form, sometimes even more than one main verb, as you're about to discover. When trying to determine which word or words in a sentence are verbs, you should look for 2 features. First, can you change the tense or time frame of the word? Can you, for instance, make it happen in the past or the future? If you can, it's a verb, because only verbs can change tense, that is, when they happen. The principal way English changes tense with verbs is by adding tense markers, like have or did. Those make the verb past tense. Or will. Will makes it future tense. So if you have a word like run, try adding have or did, and ask yourself if have run or did run makes sense. Does it? Yes, of course it does. Can you make run future? Is it possible to say will run? Sure, that's because run is a verb. But a noun like, I don't know, celery can't change tense. I did celery that. Or maybe someday in the future, I will celery that. Nope, it's just not possible to go celerying, ever. Second, here's another feature unique to verbs in English. They can be replaced by do, does, did, or done, as in have done. The English verb do is a sort of proverb. It replaces verbs the same way pronouns replace nouns. In other words, just as you can substitute it for a noun like celery, I like celery, I like it, you can replace most verbs with a form of do. For instance, I ate the celery can also be expressed as I did it. If did can replace ate, then ate must be a verb that makes sense as long as you're in a context where your reader or listener understands that did or did it means ate the celery, that is. So, the upshot is, there are 2 tests to see if an English word is a verb. One, if you can put tense markers like have, did, or will in front of it, and it makes sense. It has to be a verb. Will go or did go makes sense because go is a verb. Will cucumber doesn't make sense because cucumber is a noun, and nouns don't change tense. 2, can you replace the word with some form of do? Obey is a verb, so you can replace I obey with I do, as long as it's understood that doing means obeying in the context of the sentence. But futile, in the sentence, resistance is futile, cannot be replaced by do. Resistance is do. That is incorrect and makes no sense. Because futile is an adjective, and do can't replace an adjective, only a verb. As with the tests for nouns and adjectives, which we discussed in the first grammar preview, both these tests for verbs won't always work with every verb. However, one of them will, almost invariably. There is one other thing to note about verbs that may help you identify them in a sentence. English verbs often have helping words in front of them. Helping words include tense markers, as we just noted, will, did, have, had, but they can also include other kinds of markers like not, might, would, could, must. These can also serve as simple, straightforward indicators that a word is a verb. But where helping words can be quite helpful in identifying verbs, the endings you'll find on a lot of verbs won't be. Endings like ing or ed, as in he is working, he worked. Though these endings are attached to a verb here, work, they have multiple uses in English and can signal that a word is a noun or an adjective as well. So they're not very helpful when you're trying to make basic distinctions between parts of speech. Therefore, in this lesson, it's best for you just to forget endings like ing or ed when you're trying to determine whether a word is a verb or not, and instead simply test the base of the word. For example, work instead of worked or working. For that reason, as we go about identifying verbs in sentences and paragraphs below, we'll remove any ing or ed ending before we test to see if a word is a verb. Here's a sentence, and if it's a full sentence, which it is, it has a verb. But let's not start by looking for the verb. Not yet. Let's start with what you already know: how to determine which words are the nouns and adjectives in a sentence. If you take them out of the mix, it will be much easier to see which words are the verbs, for the simple reason you'll remove from consideration half or more of the possibilities. So what are the nouns in this sentence? Which words are plural or can be pluralized with s? Do any of them have, or can they have, the or a in front of them? Can any of them be replaced with a pronoun like they or it? Those are the tests for nouns we outlined in the first grammar preview. Which words in this sentence pass any or all of those tests? What's the first noun here? Good. Romans. It's plural. It's got the in front of it, and you could use they instead. Is there another noun in this sentence? How about world? You could say worlds. It also has the in front of it, and you could replace it with it. Those are obviously both nouns, and I've colored them red the way we do with nouns. But wait, what's in between the thes and the nouns? Yes, modifiers, adjectives, ancient Romans, and Mediterranean world. Clearly, both ancient and Mediterranean modify, that is, delimit the possibilities of, the nouns they're attached to. In other words, we're talking about only the ancient Romans, not modern Romans, and only the Mediterranean world, not the whole world. For that reason, I've colored ancient and Mediterranean orange per our usual practice with adjectives. Now, what's left in this sentence? I see two articles, the and the, two adjectives, ancient and Mediterranean, and two nouns, Romans and world. That accounts for 6 of the 7 words total in this sentence, which means the only word left has to be the verb, because full sentences have to have main verbs. So conquered must be a verb, but let's test it anyway. Can you make conquered future tense? Remember to use the base word conquer. Can you say will conquer? Sure, that makes sense. What about the do rule? Can you substitute a form of do? Bear in mind, you might have to put do in the appropriate tense for this context. That is, use did or done or some other form of do. So in place of the ancient Romans conquered, can you say the ancient Romans did it? Sure, as long as you're in a context where it's clear that did means conquered, not ate celery or something. So, conquered is a verb. Let's tint it tainted green and try another sentence. What sensible people in pre-Roman times have ever guessed that Rome would one day rule the whole Italian peninsula? A somewhat longer thought, and thus a bit more complicated, well, at first sight at least, but the tests for verbs are simple, and they don't change. So don't let the length of the sentence confuse you. Keep your focus and apply the simple tests for verbs to each word one by one. And let's start the analysis here the same way we did in the last sentence, by determining which words are nouns. I'll give you a hint. There are 5 nouns in this sentence. Can you find them all? Pause the presentation, run the noun tests, plural, pronoun, the or a, and then start the presentation again to see if your answers are right. Done? Here are the nouns in this sentence: people, times, Rome, day, and peninsula. All these words are or can be pluralized. All of them either have or could have the in front of them and or be changed out for a pronoun. Now, which words are adjectives? Remember, you have to have a noun to have an adjective, so look in front of the nouns, which is where English adjectives tend to come. Remember, too, that one noun can have more than one stupid, silly, dumb adjective. Annoying, irksome, and vile, isn't it? And hint, there are 5 adjectives here too. Pause the presentation, and I'll be waiting here when you're done. Okay, got them? Sensible, pre-Roman, one, whole, Italian. All of them right in front of their nouns, each modifying the noun it goes with. So, taking out 10 words which are nouns or adjectives, and thus can't be verbs by definition, cuts in half the possibilities for which words are verbs. That's a good thing, yeah? Now, apply the verb tests, tense and do, to the remaining words to see which ones are verbs. Which words in this sentence can change tense? Can you, for instance, add will to would? Will would. No. In? That we already know is a preposition. We learned about prepositions like in the last grammar preview. So if it's a preposition, it can't also be a verb. No green for in. What about guessed? Remember, look at the base word only. Not guessed, but guess. Can you say will guess? Sure. Can you say have guessed? I guess so, because that's exactly what this sentence says. Have ever guessed. And it has would in front of it too, which is another helper word often attached to verbs. So if you can attach a tense marker, have, and a helper word, would, to guess, then I guess it has to be a verb. But before greening it, let's apply the other test too, just for practice. Can you replace guess with a form of do? Have ever done it? Sure you can, as long as the listener understands that have done it means guessed. Guessed is definitely a verb. Paint that guess green. Any other verbs here? Neither ever nor that can be verbs. Will ever, will that? Don't think so. Would, we already decided, can't take will, so the only big word left in this sentence is ruled. Can you say will rule? Have ruled? Seems fine to me. Can you replace rule with do? Would one day do this? Sure. And note that rule has would in front of it, and would is a helping word often seen with verbs. That's 3 verby things that rule does. Case closed. Rule is a verb. Green it. Ready to go mainstream and do a whole paragraph? Oh, come on. Sure you are. Here goes. Start as we've been doing throughout this preview. Pause the presentation and find the nouns and adjectives in this passage first. I'll tell you this much. There are 12 nouns and 11 adjectives here. Finding them, you will remove almost half of the words from consideration as verbs, which will make identifying the verbs just that much easier. If you did the first grammar preview, you'll recognize this passage, and that will no doubt speed things along for you. If you didn't, and you have trouble determining which words are nouns and adjectives here, please go back and review that grammar preview presentation, the first one, and learn how to identify nouns and adjectives. So hit pause now and restart the presentation when you're done digging 12 nouns and 11 adjectives out of this paragraph. All right, you got them all in your muddy hands? Here they are, in raging red and organic orange. Now let's look for the verbs among the words that are left. Start at the top. The, that's not a verb, that's the English article, forget that. Next word, ousted. Using only the base word, oust, can you make it future? Will oust? Sure. Can you use do to replace it? The early Romans did oust, meaning they ousted their kings. Yep. Oust is a verb. And is a conjunction. You can't will and something. So, what about established? Remember, use establish, the base form of the word, not established. Can you say, will establish? Did establish it? Yes, so you can change the tense of establish and replace it with a form of do. Establish must be a verb. Next, led, will lead, did lead it. Yep, both tests work. Led is a verb. Are you seeing how to do this? Okay then, filthy fingers, you tell me which words in the rest of this passage are verbs. Pause the presentation again and run the tests. Go. Okay, you're back, so you must know what the next verb after led is. What is it? Yes, called. Will call, did call it. Next verb. Was. That's a tough one because it looks like a small word, a conjunction or preposition perhaps, but it passes muster as a verb. You can say will be and was are two forms of the same verb. So if you can change the word's tense, it's a verb. Is there another verb here? Sure enough, seems. Will seem, did seem, as it does seem. Any more verbs? Yes, got, will get, who did get. And that's it, right? No, wait. What about had? Small word, super simple form, but is it a verb? Will have? The only people did have it, that is, they had wealth? Had passes both tests. It must be a verb. That makes 8 verbs in this passage. Well, want to try another paragraph? Sure you do. Start with the nouns and adjectives. There are 15 nouns and 10 adjectives. As before, if you did the first grammar preview, you'll recognize this passage too, which will make isolating the nouns and adjectives all that much easier. If you didn't, it'll take you longer. In either case, I'll see you on the other side of the pause. Okay, here are the nouns and adjectives. Now find me the first verb. Please. Well, it's not of, is it? That's a preposition. What about called? Will call? Okay. Did call? Yuck. That really doesn't work here, but it would work in a different sentence. In a simpler sentence like I call can be replaced by do, I do call. So in a different context, call can pass the do test. And anyway, a word has to pass only one of the verb tests to be a verb. So the tense marker test is really all you need. Called has to be a verb. Make it green. Next verb. Good. Maintained. Will maintain. The families did maintain it. Next. Lasted. Good. Next. Established. Excellent. Next. Giving. Remember to look at the base word only. Give. Does give pass the verb tests? Yep. Will give. Does give it. Good job. Here's another passage. Let's do the same. Find the nouns and adjectives first. Pause the presentation, and I'll see you on the flip side. Here are the nouns and adjectives in this passage. What's the first verb? spent. Then, waging. Next, gained. Next, developed. Next, had. Then, all the way at the bottom, requiring. Any more? Yes, one. Learn. I think you get it now. Think, get, they're verbs, right? So let's move up to battle speed. The rest of this presentation is a series of passages, 7 in fact, for you to test your ability to identify verbs in English. As before, I'll give you a passage, then a slide showing the nouns and adjectives in that passage. You figure out which of the remaining words are verbs. Pause the presentation as necessary. When you've done enough that you feel confident in your ability to root out all the verbs in a paragraph, please move on to the last grammar preview presentation on subjects and direct objects. Walete discipuli.